Like, you know, they say a threesome with a girl and two guys is a devil's threesome. This was like, Satan was there.
It's time for the 13 Nights of Saraween.
Hey besties, it's Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are embarking on a journey. We are going to be reading omegaverse books. You might be asking yourself, what is the omegaverse? Have no fear. I will be taking you to class. I will be giving a TEDx presentation, and then after that we can talk about my TBR and I will vlog the books that I'm reading in the omegaverse. Also, before we get going, I do have to point out that I did wear this wolf shirt for the omegaverse. If you know, you know. And then I also have this bat bow that my boyfriend made. My boyfriend recently got into leatherworking and he made me this little bow, and so I wanted to wear it for you guys because it's so cute. Omegaverse 101. Oh, I shouldn't have tried to rip that off. Oh, sorry. Please hold. Before I give you the explanation, I do want to say I owe a lot of my research to Coley Does Things. She is a YouTuber that focuses on fan fiction, and her 45-minute video about the omegaverse was very helpful, so I will link it down below. So the omegaverse is an erotic subgenre that got its start in fan fiction in 2010. It of course began in the supernatural fandom because that just makes sense. What you need to understand about omegaverse, and this is the part that can be the most confusing, is not a single person owns it. Both fan fiction and mainstream authors take their own creative approach to the omegaverse, and they observe the most popular hallmarks, which we will go over today. So the basics. Omegaverse is based off of the now defunct wolf theory of their pack hierarchy. There's two types of omegaverse stories. There's shifter and non-shifter. Shifter, of course, involves people who are able to shift into other beings, whether that be a cat, a dog, a wolf, a werewolf, whatever you want, they can shift into things. And then we have non-shifter, which are humans that we apply this hierarchy to. Omegaverse is also known as ABO, which stands for Alpha, Beta, Omega. So something that pretty much all omegaverse stories observe is this Alpha, Beta, Omega classification for their characters. Alphas tend to be the strongest. They are leaders. They're the people that form packs. And the big thing about them is that they go into something called a rut. And basically what a rut is this major desire to mate. They want to have sex, they want to bone down, they want to fuck. And when they go through these ruts, they get very aggressive, very territorial, they can be very possessive. And it's just, you know, it's a time when they're sort of just, they need to go to horny jail, honestly. Betas are your regular schmegular Joes. They are the closest you can get to a normal human in an omegaverse story. They're just kind of there. Depending on the author of an omegaverse story, they can be important, non-important. It just really depends on the creative license of the person writing the story. Betas can be a part of a pack, but they're typically not the person that alphas or omegas are looking for. Finally, we have omegas, and they are the special snowflakes of the omegaverse. They are very few and far between. That is a very popular trope that most authors tend to like to do, that omegas are just like this special thing that all alphas are seeking out, because when they're going into these ruts, they're like, I want to fuck an omega, I want to bond with an omega, that's where I want to be. They're typically depicted as being the weakest character and the one that needs to be babied and taken care of. They're also the baby makers in the omegaverse. Like, omegas are the ones that can make children. Omegas go into what we like to call a heat, which is basically when they get very dazed and confused and they emit this scent, this pheromone that makes alphas just fucking lose their minds. They are wanting to rut with them because they're in heat. It's basically giving submissive and breedable vibes. And something that you need to know about heats is that omegas need to bone down for a very long time before they are satiated. It's almost like a period for the omegaverse, and it is not specific to women. It can be male or female. And the most important thing that an omega needs during a heat is a nest. And a nest is a safe place where they can just fuck for days on end until they are satiated. And so these nests typically are a place where they feel safe, where they can be with their pack. There's like soft blankets, just pretty much picture when cats go into heat. This is very animalistic. That is why it's based on wolves. Heats and ruts can be very frenzy inducing, so it is recommended in the omegaverse that they do it in private because it can make other alphas or other omegas around them also go crazy. So there's also something called a contact heat, where if a character comes across an alpha that they're very attracted to, they can go into heat even though it's not their like time of the month. Also, heats happen whenever the author decides. It can be every month, it could be twice a year, it could be once a year. It's whatever the author decides. There's a lot of creative license in omegaverse to kind of take these basic concepts and make them your own. All right, let's get into the biology of all of this. We have a bond. A bond is a very special connection between an alpha and an omega. Alphas and omegas are the most common pairing because they are the sort of baby making duo, but betas can also be bonded to alphas if they want to do that. It depends again on the author, but that is common in stories. So what happens when a couple bonds is that the alpha will bite whoever they're trying to bond with, and they will create a bond mark, which is basically a bite that becomes a scar, and it will stay there. And oftentimes in an omegaverse story, it becomes sort of like a kinky little area. It's very sensitive to the touch, and it responds very strongly to the alpha that created it. Whoever the alpha mates and bonds to is typically very connected to them both physically and emotionally, and so it's just sort of a thing marking you as theirs. And especially when they go into a rut, they will feel very territorial over you, very possessive, and it's kind of up to the author to decide how they want alphas to act. Like maybe if you're reading like a dark romance omegaverse, it's gonna be like super possessive, but if you're reading like a more, I don't know, like even keeled one, then maybe it'll just be like, I really care about you and like you belong to me, but like in a like you have your own rights sort of way. That leads us into nodding, which I left blank on purpose because I thought it would be more fun if we drew this together. So if you're not familiar with nodding, it's actually not original to the omegaverse. It's actually a kink trope thing that was existing long before, but omegaverse did adopt it because of this whole situation. And so what you need to know about nodding, it has to do with the peen. Also, if you're a youtube.com authority, please don't demonetize me. This is educational. This is biology. This is school. The biggest thing to think about with nodding is that it's like a lock and a key. And so picture this. Picture the penis. It is typically here, you know, just a general penis shape. At the base of the penis, there is something called a knot, and it inflates during sex when they're very turned on. Something like this. I know that just looks like balls, but the balls would be, and I hate myself for drawing that part. The balls would be down here, you know, that would be the ball area. But here, at the base of the penis, during sex, it will inflate. And so when it enters an orifice, this could be a bussy, this could be a vagina, it could be a couple of different things depending on the story. When it goes in, you know, picture this, it's going in, it will go to the base of the penis, and then when this part inflates, it will lock inside. This is a breeding kink situation. If you have a breeding kink, you will absolutely love the omegaverse. So once it's in there, this is where the lock and key situation comes. It, you know, you can't get out until this thing ejaculates as much as possible, leaving all the seed in there so that you can possibly create a baby. If you're dealing with a story with a female alpha, you will typically have a couple of different options. You'll either do a lock mechanism where when you enter the vagina, something inflates in the vagina to kind of lock, you know, the thing into place, or you might have a clit situation where it's like getting bigger and becoming its own sort of disco stick situation. But basically, that's all you need to know about nodding. I actually hate this image. It's very, very cursed. So if you are an omega, you create something called slick. And slick is essentially like getting wet, but it is a little bit ooey and gooey, and it makes it just easier for things to slip and slide, you know, all around while you're having intercourse. And so it's important for an omega to create that so that things can just get situated, especially if it's a male-male pairing, because, you know, the bussy is not known for creating, you know, wetness, but in this world, she's doing it, baby. She's creating this. I also chose a very cursed image for the slick. Another very important thing to know about the roots of omegaverse is that it started with male-male pairings in the supernatural fandom. So we have something called mpreg, or male pregnancy. So in a world where alphas and omegas are mating and they're both men, like I mentioned, you can use the bussy as a gateway into a womb of some kind. So it doesn't matter if you're male, you probably will have the equipment to hold a babe inside. I did actually read a book with mpreg in it for science for this video, and so I will tell you more about the birthing situation when we talk about that book. Finally, that leads me to packs. Packs are a very important part of the omegaverse. A lot of authors observe this, and packs are typically a combination of a bunch of these different characters, alpha, beta, and omega. A very common way to do a pack is you might have a bunch of alphas with one omega, or if you're feeling frisky and unique, you might have a couple of alphas, a beta, and an omega. But typically most packs only have one omega. Once in a while, an author might do it where there's a bunch of omegas and one alpha, but that's not as common. And what's important to note is that pack dynamics differ from book to book, and it really just depends on what the author wants to do. That's the thing. All of this depends on the author, because the author can take a very creative license, use just parts of the omegaverse, use all of the omegaverse. Also, if you do a shifter one, you also have to add in the dynamics of like if you're turning into wolves or cats or whatever. Like imagine warrior cats in this omegaverse. Oh my god, that fanfiction probably exists. But anyway, I hope that this was helpful. I hope you feel educated, and thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but I did bring Leland back. If you watched my last video where I brought out my bulletin board, I used Leland as my pointer. He is just a bubble wand that I found at Target in like the $5 section. Oh, I don't like this after talking about omegaverse. Oh, I did it! So you're probably wondering, what is my TBR for this cursed video? And first, I'm going to be reading Lola and the Millionaires. This is actually an omegaverse book that was recommended to me by some of my patrons. They all said this was like kind of the best omegaverse book in their opinion, and it's also a very good introduction into the world. This book focuses on a girl named Lola who has a bad past with alphas. She is a beta, and so she is not someone that like alphas are typically looking for, because they're looking for omegas. And so she kind of gets involved with this pack with a bunch of different alphas and a beta and all sorts of stuff. And then I wanted to go to the roots of the omegaverse, and so I was like, I have to read a book with M pregnant. I just have to. And so I discovered there's this author named Kellex who's very popular for writing male romance, and particularly in the omegaverse. And so I found one called His Surrogate Omega, which is about a guy who becomes a surrogate for an alpha and an omega couple, and he is going to like carry their baby. And it was a trip. It really was a trip. At this point, I've already read the books, so I'm just filming this intro after the fact, but I can't wait for you to see this. Also, for my Patreon, I read a book called Squeak, which is actually the only shifter omegaverse that I read for this, and this is about two guys that can shift into balloon animals. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and join my Patreon. There's is funnel cake frosting. What was the reason? Genuinely. Imagine just being like, I'm gonna avoid paying rent by turning into a balloon animal every night. It seems like a really good plan. Okay, besties, according to my audiobook, I am 34% of the way through Lola and the Millionaires, and I gotta say, I'm not hating this. I kind of like it. I didn't really know what to expect going into omegaverse. I was picturing just non-stop sex, because a lot of them are reverse harem. But that is not the case. This actually has a lot of plot. Also, I did just gloss over the fact that I'm wearing a towel on my head because I just took a shower, but that's fine. I just wanted to give you guys an update. I wanted to be in the moment, tell you guys what I'm feeling. So the book opens with Lola going to a beta club. Apparently it's her tendency to go there on the weekends and look for someone to hook up with. And so she has a very traumatic past that's being hinted at right from the get-go, and we know that she doesn't like alpha, so she specifically likes to go to the beta club to, you know, express her sexual frustration and desires. She starts dancing with this guy who's like super sexy. He's wearing a suit, he looks really put together. They like lock eyes and they just like have an instant connection, so they're dancing. And honestly, it gets very smutty very quickly. It's a very risque scene, the way that they're dancing together. And so she takes him to the back of the club to this like private employee bathroom, and they start to hook up. Very great scene, by the way. But right as they're about to do the deed, Lola notices that he has a bond mark on his neck. So apparently his alpha has bitten him, he's mated to someone, and so she immediately freaks out because she's afraid of alphas. She wants nothing to do with them, and she knows that alphas can be possessive, they can be territorial, and she's like, I'm not trying to fuck around with someone's mate. So she immediately runs away, and the guy is like, wait, because he seems to be like really into her. And then we find out that the next day is actually her first day at a new job. Her cousin helped her get a job at a fashion magazine. It's always been her dream to work there, and so she's there to kind of assist on like photo shoots, help with different spreads in the magazine. She ends up going to a photo shoot on her first day to help out with makeup for this really famous model named Rake, who is an omega, and so she has to help him cover up his bite. Like he has like a bond mark as well, and so she's a little nervous around him, but he's like really nice to her, and he's like flirting with her but like not being like too overbearing. And then to close out the day, she actually ends up getting stuck in the elevator with Cyrus and Matthew, who like I said are both alphas, and she ends up having a panic attack and collapsing, and they realize that she's afraid of alphas. And then lo and behold, the guy from the club shows up, and we find out that his name is Leo, and they're all a pack, like all of them together. Like all these guys that we've been meeting, they're a pack, and I just know they're all gonna get it with Lola. Besties, I gotta say, even though this is only my first introduction into the omegaverse, I am really liking it because the guys are just like so sweet and nice, and they are taking care of Lola a lot. It's just very refreshing after doing so many subgenre videos where I really feel like all the characters should go to jail. Like everyone in this so far, great, love them. So we know a little bit about the pack now that she's gotten stuck in an elevator with them, and Leo showed up and we found out that they're all together. And so I thought we would just kind of run down through the characters so we can keep track of them. So we've got Matthew, who is the CEO of the fashion magazine that she works at, and he's an alpha. Then we've got Cyrus, who's her boss, and he is also an alpha. She also met Rake, who is the omega of the pack, and he's a very famous model. And then Rake has a bodyguard named Wes, who is an alpha. And then we know that Leo is a beta, and he was the one that was at the club that Lola was trying to hook up with. And we discovered that he's actually the club owner. And I don't think we've met him yet, but his mate is Caleb, who's also an alpha. So I guess there's 4 alphas in this whole group. And what's interesting is that this book has predominantly been Lola's POV, but Wes actually had his own chapter where we find out all those many moons ago when she got abused by a bunch of alphas, he was the one to like pick her up and take her home after she like had been through it, and he like took care of her, blah blah. Like caretaking is a huge thing in this book. But Caleb is the one that has the biggest connection with Lola because they did meet at the club and they almost hooked up. And then after she faints in the elevator, he is the one to take her home and like take care of her, make her food, make sure that she's doing well. And she finally agrees to go out with him because they do have a very strong connection. And even though she's afraid of alphas and he has literally 4 alphas in his pack, she's kind of like feeling it. So it's been just really refreshing to be reading this. And Lola's like going to work, she's doing the fashion magazine stuff, and so far there's actually only been like 1 true sex scene. We had the hookup, kind of making out, other stuff was going on in that first scene with Leo, and then later after she finally agrees to go out on a date with him, they do have sex, and that scene was pretty smutty. Like they have sex quite a lot, but it was also very wholesome. Like they were like talking about their feelings. He was sharing with her that he would love for her to get to know his alphas. We also learned through some side characters that it's possible to not accept the whole pack when you date someone who's in one, but people enjoy it more if you do accept the whole pack because the pack is really bonded like emotionally and they all tend to be having sex with each other. Not to say that every single member of a pack is having sex. It's a very complicated dynamic that can differ from pack to pack, but from what I gather so far, I'm not completely sure, it does seem like a lot of the people in this pack are having sex. I'm digging it, I really am, and that is a big statement coming from me because every book that I read for these subgenre videos has been horrible except for maybe 1. I will continue to share details with you guys, but I'll try not to do any spoilers because a lot of people say that this is one of the best omegaverse books, so I definitely don't want to spoil it in case you want to read it, but I will just like kind of lightly talk about the plot as we move forward. Okay besties, a couple of updates. Number 1, you are balancing on this stack of like nail polish things. I do like the semi-cured gel nail strips on my nails. That's the other update I need to give you, is that I did a new set and it's a very cute Halloween set and I love it. So love that for me. But I have updates for you about the actual book. I am loving Lola and the Millionaires. Like it is really cute. I wouldn't say it's like the best book I've ever read in my entire life, but I feel like it's a really great introduction into omegaverse. I am really enjoying it. I think the biggest thing that I love is how wholesome it is. Like if you enjoy the he fell first trope, times that by like 5. All of these men love Lola before she knows that she loves them, and it's so fucking cute. Also, I have figured out the sex situation. It's a little bit surprising to me. As you can see, I scribbled some stuff out because it was a little confusing for me at first, but Matthew, the CEO guy, the French guy, I don't know if I mentioned that he was French, but the older guy who is Lola's CEO at her like magazine company, he actually is not mated or having sex with anybody in the pack. And then Wes is also just the bodyguard. So Wes and Matthew do not have sex with anyone. They're just in a pack. And that was news to me. I did not know you could be in a pack but not be fucking people. Apparently packs are also just like family. So Matthew's whole thing is that he just has like a familial bond with everyone, and so like the pack is really important to him, but he's not fucking anyone. And he actually has a girlfriend named Carolyn who is the beta, and she's the one that like kind of rejected the pack. Like she just likes Matthew, she doesn't want anyone else. And then Wes literally is like a lone wolf. Like he's in the pack but he's like not having sex with anyone. So Cyrus and Caleb, I think that I don't have the answer on this one, but Cyrus and Rake and Caleb and Rake and Caleb and Leo are definitely a thing. Lola has now been having sex with both Rake and Leo, and I did actually thoroughly enjoy those sex scenes, which was a great surprise for me because there were quite a lot of fluids, and if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you will have heard me say I don't love fluids. I really stumbled on that word. I don't love fluids. I think they're gross and not great. I'm not a cum girl. I don't know if anyone refers to themselves as a cum girl, but I'm definitely not her. I think I just love how everyone is like alpha or like very like in charge. Like even Rake, even though he's an omega, he also like is very flirtatious and very forward with Lola, and so they all just are like super into her, and we keep getting like little POVs from each character and they're all like, oh my god, I love Lola. So what's cool is I think she's going to act as a link. That's a term that got introduced to me, and I think a link is when you aren't having sex with certain people in your pack, but you both have sex with the same person in the pack. I think it did help that I did a bunch of research about omegaverse before I got into this. Like, this book definitely is a good intro. Like, if you didn't know anything about the omegaverse and you read this book, you would be able to like pick up on a lot of like the way that the world building works and like how packs work and whatnot. But I'm glad that I already kind of knew. I think my personal favorite guy in the pack is Wes. There's something about him. He's a little mysterious. He's the bodyguard. He's the one that's like keeping people protected. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention is that Lola obviously has trauma with her past alphas, and we find out that the guy that like did most of the kind of abuse to her, he actually died. And so now there's another guy, like another alpha from that pack that like also tormented her, and he has been sending her like threatening texts and kind of stalking her. And so she has been staying with the guys at their mansion because it is called Lola and the Millionaires because these men are millionaires, and she's been like staying with them and they're like protecting her. And Wes is all like hacker man, like as a bodyguard, like trying to find out where the bad guy is so he can like take him down. And so I just really appreciate his like kind of like mysterious lone wolf energy where he's just like, I gotta protect my pack. So besties, I have finished it and I think I liked it. I'm not gonna give it a super high rating. I think it's like a 3-star for me, but not in a bad way. Like, I had a lot of fun reading it and I feel like it was a really good intro to the omegaverse. But I think what I didn't like about it is the second half of it really devolves in being like entirely smut. Like, Lola just starts banging everybody and it gets kind of heated. It gets kind of crazy. And the gymnastics of one of the orgy scenes it's confusing. There's a scene where Lola joins Rake's heat, and so Rake is inside her and then Leo is in her ass. And then Caleb's dick is in Leo's ass. I feel like Cyrus gets involved at one point as well. And honestly, I need to like draw a diagram or something because it was giving the human centipede. Like, everybody was connected in some way. And I was just like, what is actually going on in this Wendy's? Like, what is going on? Like, this is the devil's work. Like, you know, they say a threesome with a girl and 2 guys is a devil's threesome. This was like, Satan was there. He was there. He was partaking. Like, the devil was there. It was more than a threesome, so it was kind of crazy. And I really enjoyed Matthew and Wes specifically. I feel like they're my 2 favorite because they're the more like mysterious guys. And we definitely got more of like Lola with Matthew, and we're like hinting at Wes towards the end because it kind of ends on a cliffhanger about like the guy that's been like stalking Lola. I definitely want to read more Catherine Moon. I know in this like sweet omegaverse series she has one called Bad Alpha where there's actually a female alpha, and I really want to read that one because I think she's also like a hit woman or something, and that really speaks to me. I love a woman who commits crimes and like kills people, and I guess if I'm gonna like be reading more of the series, I probably should read what's gonna happen next, because I will say the stalking plot was good. It was kind of getting me at the end. I was kind of like feeling like, oh my god, suspense. Like, she goes to her apartment and she can tell like he broke in and like his scent is everywhere, and I'm like, oh my god, I thought he was like gonna attack her. But it was a lot of fun, and I feel like it was a really great introduction into the omegaverse. So I would highly recommend this if you're like trying to like dapple your toe. That's not what it is. Dip your toe. Where did I come up with dapple? Dapple your toe in it. If you want to dip your toe into the omegaverse pond, then I definitely would recommend Lola and the Millionaires. You are the moon that breaks the night for which I have to. Okay, besties, I have started my second omegaverse book, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of liking this one too. So this one is called His Surrogate Omega, and I gotta admit, when it first started, it was a little bit of a jump scare because there's a note at the beginning where the author Kellex kind of explains the setup so you can like know what's going on. And something that was said is that there are no women in the story. We're living in a world where there's only men, and that was a little bit of a jump scare. I don't particularly love when there's only men in a world. Like, that sounds very scary to me, but I was like, you know what, I'm gonna trust Kellex. Like, perhaps this is just like a beautiful world with a bunch of gay love. So the setup here is a lot less pack focused than Lola and the Millionaires. So basically in this world, omegas are very sought after by alphas. Like, that's how most omegaverse is. Omegas are literally not safe unless they have an alpha, and typically your mate slash the person you can like bond with is only like one person, so it's like a fated mated sort of thing. And so as an omega, after you've had your first heat, your goal is to find your alpha. So our main character is this guy named Gray, and he is 35, and in this world most people are mated by the time they're 25, so he's kind of like 10 years overdue. So everyone kind of sees him as like a spinster, and he's been spending the last however many years living with his brother who is an alpha, because basically if you're an omega, you're unsafe to just kind of live out in the open. So if you don't have an an alpha, you need to live on the Omega compound unless you have like a family member or an alpha that you can like stay with. And so he was living with his brother Silver, and his mate mated like Omega. But recently there was an accident, which I believe was like a car accident or something. And so Silver and his mate died and left behind 3 sons that are all Omegas. I actually wrote this all down so we can like talk about it, kind of how we did with Lola and the Millionaires. So we have Silver, he's dead. At the very start, we're kind of at his funeral and everybody's grieving him because Silver left behind 3 children. We have Avery, who's 20 and he's an Omega. Lake is 13, also Omega. And then I believe the youngest, his name is August, and he's 10 and also an Omega. And so Silver was kind of like the keeper of all of them and making sure that they were all okay. And now that he's dead, they all have to go live on this Omega compound. Technically, Avery has custody because he's 20, so he's like looking after his younger brothers, but Gray and Avery are kind of working together because Gray's always been a part of the family because he's never found his alpha, so he's always like lived with them. And so Gray just kind of feels like very useless, very sad. He's lonely because he's never met his alpha, and every time he has a heat, he has to take heat suppressants because I think I mentioned in my intro when I explained this, like heats are very painful to an Omega if they don't have sex, and so he doesn't have anyone to have sex with. I will say it is bringing up the whole virginity kink because we find out that he's actually never had sex because he doesn't even have sex with betas to try to like suppress his like heat desires. He just takes like the heat blocker medicine, but lately they haven't really been working on him. Anywho, since Silver died, they don't really know what they're going to do about money, and they have to live on the Omega compound. And so Gray gets the idea that he's going to go be a surrogate for another couple, like an Alpha and Omega couple. And so that's a whole thing. And then Avery gets a plan where he is going to take scent blockers, which will make him seem like he's a beta so he can go to college and like get a job and like take care of his brothers. And so they're kind of fighting back and forth about who is going to sacrifice their life to do what. But my thinking is that Avery is actually going to be the second book because I think this is a series, and so I'm pretty sure Avery's kooky plan where he pretends to be a beta will come up in the next book. And I'm not gonna lie, I might read it because I am intrigued by his plot. But Gray calls up this Omega service and is like, hey, I want to be like a surrogate, like set me up with a couple. And so he gets set up with Jamie and Rowan. And so Jamie is an Omega who has cancer, and so he had to get his womb removed because he had a bunch of tumors. And so he has always wanted to have children. That's like one of his biggest joys and desires in life. And unfortunately, because he has cancer, he like can't do it. And also he's worried that he's gonna die soon. And so he wants to leave his mate Rowan, who's an alpha, with, you know, like a family. And so Rowan keeps telling him like, I just want you to get better. I don't really care if we have kids, but it's like Jamie's dream. And he's like, you know what? The cancer has taught me that you can't take life for granted. And so Jamie and Gray meet in an interview to see if Gray would be a right surrogate. And right away they have a connection. It's not necessarily like romantic, it's kind of like a brotherly love kind of thing. But I have a theory, they are attracted to each other. They talk about how each one of them is like handsome, and so I think we're about to have a throuple situation. But in this world, like I mentioned, it's not really a pack situation. It's more so like family units where you have an alpha and omega, and then they have like children together, and then the children's can be like a mixture of like alphas, betas, omegas. And so I think that we're gonna have Rowan end up mating with Gray, because in this world everyone is pretty much like you can only mate with one person. Like an alpha bonding with an omega is like a once in a lifetime thing. It's like you're like soulmate basically. And so I'm thinking there's gonna be a throuple situation going. So Rowan and Gray have not met yet, but I'm pretty sure when they meet they're gonna be attracted to each other. But that's kind of where I'm at so far, and I am liking it. I really am. I am kind of afraid of the sex scenes though, not gonna lie, because I don't like fluids and there are no women in this, and so it's just gonna be like a lot of male fluids. Yeah, I do know that slick is a thing in here, like even though they're guys. You gotta give this book kudos because I don't like children. Like I really do not like children. I do not like pregnancy stories, and the fact that I'm so interested in this when it's literally revolving around the fact that somebody wants to get pregnant and have children. I did subject my boyfriend Aaron to me describing the entire omegaverse to him, and he was not live laugh loving with me doing that. He thought it was a little weird, but I made him because, you know, he talks to me about his D&D, and so I'm like, if you're gonna tell me about your D&D game, I'm gonna tell you about the omegaverse. And I just think that's fair. You know, couples are all about, you know, compromises, and so that is my compromise with my boyfriend. Okay besties, I finished reading his surrogate omega, and I just have to say it was very much giving Nicholas Sparks. Like I literally was crying during this book, and it was surprisingly not very smutty. There was really only like one long intimate scene, and that was when Gray went through his heat, and then he and Rowan had to like work together to like make a baby. And it was just kind of sad. I really enjoyed the friendship aspect between Gray and Jamie. Like, it was so touching. The romance was fine. I didn't love the romance. This is a very angsty story, so if you love a Nicholas Sparks ass story, you would love this so much. It was kind of giving like a Walk to Remember with like the cancer. I definitely think this book was way too long. I think it was over 400 pages, and in my opinion, I think we could have shaved off like 100 and still had a really good story. So I was sort of lagging towards the end. So I think ultimately I am going to give this 3 stars, but I still really enjoyed it, and I do think I might pick up the sequel because I do want to know what happens to Avery when he's like pretending to be a beta and like going to college and stuff. There was a little bit of that in this story, and I enjoyed those aspects. So honestly, might pick up the sequel to this, and I probably will pick up the sequel to Lola as well. Also, let's talk about Mpreg birth. So I didn't really go over that in the intro. I actually just filmed my intro, and so now we're kind of closing out the video. And so we got to the part where Gray gave birth, and it ended up being twins. And I'm gonna be upfront, it was really vague, like when they were talking about him. He had to like be on his hands and knees, like, and he was like birthing, I think, out of his ass. Because the author kept talking about how the womb was connected to the bussy situation, and so like when Gray was on heat and they were having sex, it was definitely like whatever. It also was implying that when the penis would go in, it was like going actually into the womb. So it's a little different for sure. It seemed like the hole was just everything was very connected and accessible to the alphas. And so when he was giving birth, it was just kind of like he was pushing, he was in pain, and like there wasn't a lot of like details about like where the head was crowning from or whatever. It just was kind of coming out of his ass. So I guess that's better than coming out the penis. I'm sure you were all waiting with bated breath to understand what happens in Mpreg. Obviously that's probably different per author, but that is just how Kellex decided to write that. And yeah, this sort of brings me to the end of this Omegaverse video. Who is more surprised than me that I liked these books? I'm sure you're all floored because you probably expected me to hate them and think that this was cursed. In some ways, the Omegaverse is cursed. Like when I was telling Aaron, my boyfriend, about it, he was like, please stop telling me about this. Like, this is crazy. It is weird. It's very animalistic. It can give you weird vibes. Let me know down below what your favorite Omegaverse books are. I would love to hear, and maybe I'll pick them up. Like maybe I'll do another video like reading Omegaverse. I really enjoyed it. I don't know. I had a good time. Obviously the books were not my favorite books in the world. I gave both of them 3 stars, but like they were good 3 stars. Like I was like pleasantly surprised the whole time I was reading them, and there was so much caretaking going on in the stories. I was like, oh, like a love interest that like doesn't abuse. If you've made it to the end of this video and you enjoyed it, feel free to use the wolf emoji in your comments down below. I thank you all so much for watching. You're all beautiful. Have a nice day.